The room was silent, except for the low hum of alien machinery. The air felt heavy, like the weight of the entire galaxy was pressing down on the shoulders of 5 young cadets. They stood in the center of a massive, high-tech laboratory, surrounded by towering alien instructors whose glowing eyes watched them with a mix of curiosity and disdain. One of the aliens, a tall, slender figure with shimmering blue skin, stepped forward. His voice was cold and sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "You have 45 minutes, he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Build the superweapon we've been trying to create for decades. If you fail, your entire team will be expelled from the academy. Forever." The cadets exchanged nervous glances. They were humans, Deathworlders, as the aliens called them. To the rest of the universe, Earth was a brutal, unforgiving planet, and its inhabitants were seen as primitive and weak. But these cadets had something the aliens didn't: grit, creativity, and an unshakable will to survive. The alien instructor smirked, clearly enjoying their discomfort. "Do you even understand what we're asking of you? This weapon requires precision, intelligence, and a level of technological mastery your species has never achieved. But go ahead. Try. It will be amusing to watch you fail." The cadets didn't respond. They didn't have time to argue or doubt themselves. The clock was already ticking. One of them, a young man with a determined look in his eyes, stepped forward. "We'll do it," he said firmly. His voice was steady, but his heart was racing. He knew the odds were against them, but he also knew they had no choice. This was their chance to prove that humans were more than just survivors. They were innovators, problem solvers, and, most importantly, a force to be reckoned with. The alien instructor raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the cadet's confidence. "Very well," he said, stepping back. "Begin." The cadets immediately got to work. They moved quickly, their hands flying over the strange alien tools and materials scattered across the lab. They didn't have the luxury of time to second-guess themselves. Every second counted. As they worked, the aliens watched in silence, their expressions a mix of amusement and disbelief. To them, this was nothing more than a cruel joke, a way to remind the humans of their place in the universe. But the cadets didn't care about the aliens' opinions. They were focused on one thing: completing the task. Minutes passed, and the tension in the room grew. The cadets' movements became more frantic as the clock ticked down. Sweat dripped from their foreheads, and their hands trembled with exhaustion, but they didn't stop. They couldn't stop. With just 5 minutes left, one of the cadets let out a frustrated sigh. "It's not working," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're missing something." The others paused, their faces pale with fear. They were so close, but something was wrong. The weapon wasn't functioning the way it was supposed to. The alien instructor chuckled, clearly enjoying their struggle. "I told you," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "You're wasting your time." But the cadets didn't give up. They huddled together, their minds racing as they tried to figure out what was wrong. And then, in a moment of clarity, one of them had an idea. "We've been thinking like them," she said, her eyes wide with realization. "But we're not like them. We're humans. We need to think like humans." The others nodded, understanding dawning on their faces. They quickly made a few adjustments, their hands moving with renewed energy. The aliens watched in confusion, their smug expressions fading as the cadets worked with a newfound sense of purpose. With just seconds left on the clock, the cadets stepped back. The weapon hummed to life, its energy glowing brightly as it powered up. The room was filled with a deafening silence as everyone stared at the device in awe. The alien instructor's mouth hung open in shock. "Impossible," he whispered. You did it." The cadets exchanged relieved smiles, their hearts pounding with a mix of exhaustion and triumph. They had done the impossible. They had built the superweapon in just 45 minutes, something the aliens couldn't do in decades. But as the initial shock wore off, the cadets realized that their victory had only just begun. The aliens' expressions darkened, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The story was far from over. Earth was a planet unlike any other in the galaxy. While most civilizations thrived in peaceful, resource-rich worlds, Earth was a harsh, unforgiving place. Its inhabitants, humans, had evolved in an environment filled with natural disasters, deadly predators, and extreme climates. To the rest of the universe, Earth was a death world, and its people were known as Deathworlders. The 5 cadets who had just built the alien superweapon were no exception. They had grown up in a world where survival was a daily struggle, and they had learned to adapt, innovate, and persevere against all odds. But their journey to the Intergalactic Academy had been anything but easy. The cadets' origins. Each of the cadets came from different parts of Earth, but they shared one thing in common: they had all faced challenges that would have broken most beings. The leader, the young man who had confidently accepted the aliens' challenge, was from a war-torn region where resources were scarce. He had learned to lead his family and community through constant danger, making quick decisions under pressure. The engineer, the woman who had realized they needed to think like humans, was from a coastal city that had been repeatedly hit by natural disasters. She had spent her childhood rebuilding homes and machines from scraps, developing a knack for solving problems with limited resources. The strategist, another cadet, a quiet but observant young man, had grown up in a densely populated urban area. He had learned to navigate complex social dynamics and anticipate the actions of others, skills that would prove invaluable in the academy. The fighter, one of the cadets, a strong and determined woman, had grown up in a remote, mountainous region. She had spent her life battling the elements and defending her village from wild animals, making her physically and mentally tough. The dreamer, the youngest of the group, a bright-eyed cadet with a passion for science, had grown up in a small village with limited access to technology. Despite the odds, he had taught himself advanced concepts using old books and makeshift experiments. The Intergalactic Academy. The Intergalactic Academy was the most prestigious training ground in the galaxy. It was a place where the best and brightest from countless civilizations came to learn, compete, and prove their worth. For the cadets, it was a dream come true, a chance to represent Earth and show the universe what humans were capable of. But from the moment they arrived, they were treated as outsiders. The other cadets, hailing from advanced civilizations with sleek technology and centuries of scientific knowledge, looked down on the humans. They mocked their primitive tools, their short lifespans, and their backward ways. The alien instructors were no better. They saw the humans as a curiosity at best and a nuisance at worst. They constantly reminded the cadets of their inferiority, assigning them impossible tasks and setting them up for failure. Despite the constant challenges, the cadets refused to give up. They knew they were different, but they also knew that their differences were their greatest strength. While the other cadets relied on their advanced technology and rigid thinking, the humans relied on their creativity, adaptability, and teamwork. One day, during a routine training exercise, the cadets were given a task that seemed simple on the surface: repair a broken piece of alien technology. The other teams completed the task quickly, using their advanced tools and knowledge. But when it was the humans' turn, they were given a malfunctioning device that no one had been able to fix. The aliens watched with smug smiles, expecting the humans to fail. But the cadets surprised everyone. Instead of trying to understand the alien technology, they approached the problem from a completely different angle. They used their knowledge of Earth's mechanics, combined with their ability to think outside the box, and managed to repair the device in record time. It was a small victory, but it was enough to catch the attention of the Academy's higher-ups. They began to see the potential in the humans, but they also saw them as a threat. The alien superweapon was no ordinary device. It was a marvel of engineering, a machine capable of harnessing the energy of stars and turning it into a weapon of unimaginable power. For decades, the brightest minds in the galaxy had tried to build it, but none had succeeded. The weapon was a symbol of technological mastery, and its creation was seen as the ultimate achievement. But there was a problem. The weapon was incredibly complex, requiring precise calculations and a deep understanding of advanced physics. Even the most advanced civilizations struggled to make sense of its design. The blueprints were filled with equations and diagrams that seemed to defy logic, and every attempt to build the weapon had ended in failure. The aliens who had assigned the task to the cadets were part of a proud and ancient civilization. They had been working on the superweapon for generations, pouring countless resources into its development. But despite their best efforts, they had never been able to make it work. The problem wasn't a lack of intelligence or technology. The aliens were brilliant, and their tools were far more advanced than anything the humans had ever seen. The problem was their way of thinking. They were rigid and methodical, following the same steps over and over again, even when it was clear that those steps weren't working. Over time, the superweapon became a source of frustration and embarrassment for the aliens. They had staked their reputation on its creation, and their failure was a constant reminder of their limitations. When they assigned the task to the cadets, they didn't expect the humans to succeed. They saw it as a way to humiliate the Deathworlders and reinforce their own superiority. When the cadets first saw the blueprints, they were overwhelmed. The diagrams were filled with symbols and equations they didn't understand, and the materials they were given were unlike anything they had ever worked with. But instead of giving up, they decided to approach the problem in a completely different way. The superweapon challenge was not just a test of skill, it was a test of character. The aliens wanted to see if the humans could handle the pressure of an impossible task. They wanted to see if the cadets would crumble under the weight of their own limitations. But the cadets had other plans. They knew this was their chance to prove that humans were more than just survivors. They were innovators, problem solvers, and, most importantly, a force to be reckoned with. As they stood in the lab, surrounded by skeptical aliens and the ticking clock, the cadets felt a surge of determination. They had come too far to give up now. They were Deathworlders, and they were ready to show the galaxy what that meant. The alien superweapon was no ordinary device. It was a marvel of engineering, a machine capable of harnessing the energy of stars and turning it into a weapon of unimaginable power. For decades, the brightest minds in the galaxy had tried to build it, but none had succeeded. The weapon was a symbol of technological mastery, and its creation was seen as the ultimate achievement. But there was a problem. The weapon was incredibly complex, requiring precise calculations and a deep understanding of advanced physics. Even the most advanced civilizations struggled to make sense of its design. The blueprints were filled with equations and diagrams that seemed to defy logic, and every attempt to build the weapon had ended in failure. The aliens who had assigned the task to the cadets were part of a proud and ancient civilization. They had been working on the superweapon for generations, pouring countless resources into its development. But despite their best efforts, they had never been able to make it work. The problem wasn't a lack of intelligence or technology. The aliens were brilliant, and their tools were far more advanced than anything the humans had ever seen. The problem was their way of thinking. They were rigid and methodical, following the same steps over and over again, even when it was clear that those steps weren't working. Over time, the superweapon became a source of frustration and embarrassment for the aliens. They had staked their reputation on its creation, and their failure was a constant reminder of their limitations. When they assigned the task to the cadets, they didn't expect the humans to succeed. They saw it as a way to humiliate the Deathworlders and reinforce their own superiority. When the cadets first saw the blueprints, they were overwhelmed. The diagrams were filled with symbols and equations they didn't understand, and the materials they were given were unlike anything they had ever worked with. But instead of giving up, they decided to approach the problem in a completely different way. While the aliens had focused on the technical details, the cadets focused on the big picture. They asked themselves a simple question: what is the purpose of this weapon? Once they understood that the weapon was designed to harness energy, they began to think about how energy worked on Earth. They remembered how humans had learned to harness the power of the sun, wind, and water. They thought about the simple machines they had built as children, using nothing but scraps and ingenuity. And they realized that the key to building the superweapon wasn't advanced technology, it was creativity and adaptability. As the cadets worked, they began to see patterns in the blueprints that the aliens had missed. They realized that the weapon's design was based on principles that were universal, not just alien. By applying their knowledge of Earth's energy systems, they were able to simplify the design and make it work. It wasn't easy. The cadets had to improvise, using the alien tools in ways they weren't intended to be used. They had to think on their feet, making quick decisions and adjusting their approach as they went. And they had to work together, combining their unique skills and perspectives to solve the problem. But in the end, their hard work paid off. The weapon hummed to life, its energy glowing brightly as it powered up. The aliens watched in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were seeing. The cadets had done the impossible, they had built the superweapon in just 45 minutes. The cadets' success was a turning point, not just for them, but for the entire galaxy. It proved that humans were more than just survivors, they were innovators and problem solvers. It also exposed the flaws in the aliens' way of thinking, showing that sometimes, the key to solving a problem is to approach it from a completely different angle. But the cadets knew that their victory was just the beginning. The aliens' initial shock had turned to suspicion, and the atmosphere in the room was tense. The cadets had proven themselves, but they had also made enemies. And as they looked at the glowing weapon, they couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The cadets stood in the lab, surrounded by alien tools and materials they barely understood. The clock was ticking, and the pressure was mounting. They had accepted the challenge, but now they had to figure out how to actually build the superweapon. The alien instructors watched from the sidelines, their glowing eyes filled with amusement. They didn't believe the humans could do it. To them, the task was impossible, a way to remind the Deathworlders of their place in the universe. But the cadets were determined to prove them wrong. The first step was to understand the blueprints. The cadets spread the diagrams out on a table, their eyes scanning the complex symbols and equations. At first glance, it was overwhelming. The designs were filled with details that made no sense to them, and the materials they were given were unlike anything they had ever worked with. One of the cadets, the engineer, frowned as she studied the diagrams. "This doesn't make sense," she said, pointing to a section of the blueprint. "The energy flow here is all wrong. If we follow this design, the weapon will overload and explode." The others nodded in agreement. They had all noticed the same flaw, but none of them knew how to fix it. The aliens had been following these blueprints for decades, and if they couldn't make it work, how could the cadets? The leader stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the diagrams. "We're thinking about this the wrong way," he said. "We're trying to understand their technology, but we don't need to. We just need to understand the problem." The others looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" asked the strategist. "The weapon is designed to harness energy, right?" the leader replied. "So let's think about how energy works on Earth. We've been harnessing energy for centuries, sun, wind, water. Maybe we can apply the same principles here." The cadets' eyes lit up as they realized what he was saying. They didn't need to understand the alien technology, they just needed to understand the problem and find a solution that worked for them. The plan. The cadets quickly got to work, brainstorming ideas and sketching out a new design. They decided to simplify the weapon, breaking it down into smaller, more manageable parts. Instead of trying to replicate the aliens' complex design, they focused on creating a system that would achieve the same result using their own methods. The engineer took the lead, using her knowledge of Earth's energy systems to create a new blueprint. The dreamer helped with the calculations, using his passion for science to solve the equations. The fighter and the strategist worked together to assemble the materials, using their physical strength and problem-solving skills to overcome the challenges. It wasn't easy. The alien tools were difficult to use, and the materials were unfamiliar. But the cadets didn't give up. They improvised, using the tools in ways they weren't intended to be used and finding creative solutions to every problem. With just minutes left on the clock, the cadets finally finished assembling the weapon. It looked nothing like the aliens' design, it was simpler, cruder, and far less elegant. But it worked. The cadets stepped back, their hearts pounding as they activated the weapon. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the weapon began to hum, its energy glowing brightly as it powered up. The room was filled with a deafening silence as everyone stared at the device in awe. The alien instructors were speechless. They had spent decades trying to build the superweapon, and yet these humans, these Deathworlders, had done it in just 45 minutes. It was a humbling moment, and one that would change the way the aliens saw humans forever. The cadets' success was a turning point, not just for them, but for the entire galaxy. It proved that humans were more than just survivors, they were innovators and problem solvers. It also exposed the flaws in the aliens' way of thinking, showing that sometimes, the key to solving a problem is to approach it from a completely different angle. But the cadets knew that their victory was just the beginning. The aliens' initial shock had turned to suspicion, and the atmosphere in the room was tense. The cadets had proven themselves, but they had also made enemies. And as they looked at the glowing weapon, they couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The cadets stood in the lab, their hearts still racing from the success of building the superweapon. The alien instructors were silent, their glowing eyes filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. For a moment, it seemed like the cadets had finally earned the respect they deserved. But that moment didn't last long. The cadets exchanged relieved smiles, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. They had done the impossible, and the feeling of triumph was overwhelming. The leader clapped the engineer on the back, a grin spreading across his face. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. "We actually did it." The others nodded, their eyes shining with excitement. For the first time since arriving at the academy, they felt like they belonged. They had proven that humans were capable of greatness, and nothing could take that away from them. Or so they thought. As the cadets began to pack up their tools, one of the alien instructors stepped forward. He was tall and imposing, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. Unlike the others, he didn't look impressed, he looked angry. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You may have built the weapon, but you'll never leave this academy with it." Before the cadets could react, the alien pressed a button on a small device in his hand. There was a loud click, and the superweapon suddenly powered down. The glowing energy faded, and the room was plunged into silence. The cadets stared at the weapon in shock. "What did you do?" the engineer demanded, her voice trembling with anger. The alien smirked. "I made sure you wouldn't succeed," he said. "The weapon is useless now. And so are you." The cadets quickly realized what had happened. The alien had sabotaged their work, disabling the weapon and leaving them with no way to prove their success. The clock was still ticking, and they had only minutes left to fix the damage. Panic set in as the cadets scrambled to figure out what had gone wrong. The engineer examined the weapon, her hands shaking as she tried to identify the problem. "He's inserted a fail-safe," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "It's blocking the energy flow. If we don't remove it, the weapon won't work." The others gathered around, their minds racing as they tried to come up with a solution. The leader looked at the alien instructor, his eyes narrowing. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "We proved ourselves. Why can't you just accept that?" The alien's smirk widened. "You're a threat," he said simply. "And threats must be eliminated." The cadets knew they didn't have time to argue. They had to act fast if they wanted to save the weapon, and their place at the academy. The engineer took charge, directing the others as they worked to remove the failsafe. It wasn't easy. The alien's sabotage was clever, and the failsafe was deeply embedded in the weapon systems. The cadets had to work together, using their combined skills and knowledge to bypass the block and restore the energy flow. The tension in the room was palpable as the cadets worked, their hands moving quickly and their minds focused on the task at hand. The alien instructor watched from the sidelines, his expression growing darker with each passing second. With just seconds left on the clock, the cadets finally managed to remove the failsafe. The weapon hummed to life once again, its energy glowing brightly as it powered up. The room was filled with a deafening silence as everyone stared at the device in awe. The alien instructor's smirk faded, replaced by a look of pure rage. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice filled with venom. "You may have won this battle, but the war is just beginning." The cadets didn't respond. They were too exhausted, too relieved to care about the aliens' threats. They had done the impossible, twice, and nothing could take that away from them. As the cadets left the lab, they couldn't shake the feeling that their victory had come at a cost. The alien instructor's words echoed in their minds, a reminder that not everyone was happy about their success. They had proven themselves, but they had also made enemies, powerful enemies who would stop at nothing to see them fail. But for now, they allowed themselves a moment of celebration. They had faced impossible odds and come out on top, and that was something to be proud of. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a team. The cadets stood in the lab, their hearts pounding as they stared at the superweapon. It was alive again, its energy glowing brightly after they had removed the failsafe. But their work wasn't done yet. The weapon was still incomplete, and the clock was ticking down to the final seconds. The alien instructor who had sabotaged their work watched from the sidelines, his expression dark and unreadable. The other aliens were silent, their glowing eyes fixed on the cadets. The tension in the room was unbearable, but the cadets didn't have time to think about it. They had to act fast. The engineer took charge, her hands moving quickly as she made the final adjustments to the weapon. "We need to stabilize the energy flow," she said, her voice tight with focus. "If we don't, the weapon will overload and explode." The others nodded, their minds racing as they worked to support her. The leader helped hold the weapon steady, his muscles straining as he fought to keep it in place. The dreamer monitored the energy levels, calling out instructions as the numbers fluctuated. The fighter and the strategist worked together to secure the weapon's core, using their strength and problem-solving skills to overcome the final challenges. It wasn't easy. The weapon was unstable, and the energy levels were dangerously high. The cadets could feel the heat radiating from the device, and the air around them crackled with electricity. But they didn't give up. They had come too far to fail now. With just seconds left on the clock, the cadets made the final adjustments. The weapon hummed louder, its energy glowing brighter as it reached full power. The room was filled with a deafening silence as everyone waited to see if it would work. The alien instructor who had sabotaged their work stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he watched the weapon. "It's going to explode," he said, his voice filled with certainty. "You've failed." But the cadets didn't respond. They were too focused on the weapon, their hearts pounding as they waited for the final moment. And then, it happened. The weapon stabilized, its energy flowing smoothly as it reached full power. The room was filled with a brilliant light, and the air hummed with energy. The weapon was complete. The cadets stepped back, their eyes wide with awe as they stared at the device. They had done it. Against all odds, they had built the superweapon in just 45 minutes, something the aliens couldn't do in decades. The alien instructors were speechless. They had spent generations trying to build the weapon, and yet these humans, these Deathworlders, had done it in less than an hour. It was a humbling moment, and one that would change the way the aliens saw humans forever. The cadets exchanged relieved smiles, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. They had done the impossible, and the feeling of triumph was overwhelming. The leader clapped the engineer on the back, a grin spreading across his face. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. "We actually did it." The others nodded, their eyes shining with excitement. For the first time since arriving at the academy, they felt like they belonged. They had proven that humans were capable of greatness, and nothing could take that away from them. But as they looked at the glowing weapon, they couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The alien instructor who had sabotaged their work was still watching them, his expression dark and unreadable. The cadets knew that their victory had made them enemies, and those enemies wouldn't rest until they had been defeated. As the cadets left the lab, they reflected on what they had learned. They had faced impossible odds and come out on top, not because of their technology or their intelligence, but because of their creativity, adaptability, and teamwork. They had proven that humans were more than just survivors, they were innovators, problem solvers, and, most importantly, a force to be reckoned with. But they also knew that their victory was just the beginning. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and they would need to stay strong if they wanted to survive. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a team. The cadets' victory in building the superweapon sent shockwaves through the Intergalactic Academy. For the first time, the aliens were forced to acknowledge that humans were more than just primitive Deathworlders, they were capable of greatness. But with this newfound respect came new challenges, and the cadets soon realized that their journey was far from over. News of the cadets' success spread quickly through the academy. Alien cadets and instructors alike gathered in the halls, whispering in awe about what the humans had accomplished. Some were impressed, others were jealous, and a few were openly hostile. The cadets themselves were treated differently. Where they had once been ignored or mocked, they were now met with curious stares and hesitant nods of respect. Even the alien instructors who had doubted them were forced to admit that the humans had proven themselves. But not everyone was happy about the cadets' success. The alien instructor who had sabotaged their work was furious. He had staked his reputation on their failure, and their victory was a direct challenge to his authority. He watched them from the shadows, his glowing eyes filled with anger and resentment. Despite the tension, the cadets allowed themselves a moment to celebrate. They gathered in their quarters, laughing and talking as they relived the events of the day. For the first time since arriving at the academy, they felt like they belonged. "We did it," the leader said, his voice filled with pride. "We showed them what humans are capable of." The others nodded, their eyes shining with excitement. They had faced impossible odds and come out on top, and the feeling of triumph was overwhelming. But as the celebration continued, the engineer couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "We need to be careful," she said, her voice low. "Not everyone is happy about what we've done. We've made enemies, and they're not going to let this go." The cadets' celebration was interrupted by a knock on the door. They exchanged nervous glances before the leader opened it to reveal one of the alien cadets, a tall, slender figure with shimmering silver skin. "I came to warn you," the alien said, his voice urgent. "There are those who don't want you to succeed. They see you as a threat, and they'll do whatever it takes to stop you." The cadets stared at him in shock. "Why are you telling us this?" the strategist asked, his eyes narrowing. The alien hesitated before answering. "Because I believe in what you're doing," he said. "You've shown that there's more to the universe than just technology and power. You've shown that creativity and teamwork can overcome anything. And that's something worth fighting for." The cadets knew they couldn't ignore the warning. They had proven themselves, but they had also made powerful enemies. If they wanted to survive, they would need to stay one step ahead. The leader called a meeting, and the cadets gathered around to discuss their next steps. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice serious. "We've made enemies, and they're not going to let this go. We need to stay together and watch each other's backs." The others nodded in agreement. They had faced impossible odds before, and they knew they could do it again. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a team. As the cadets prepared for the challenges ahead, they reflected on what they had learned. They had proven that humans were more than just survivors, they were innovators, problem solvers, and, most importantly, a force to be reckoned with. But they also knew that their victory was just the beginning. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and they would need to stay strong if they wanted to survive. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a team. The cadets' victory had earned them respect, but it had also made them targets. The alien instructor who had sabotaged their work wasn't done with them, he was determined to see them fail, no matter the cost. And soon, the cadets found themselves facing their greatest challenge yet. It started with a rumor. Whispers spread through the academy that someone had stolen a valuable piece of alien technology, a device capable of controlling the academy's power grid. The aliens were furious, and an investigation was launched to find the culprit. The cadets didn't think much of it at first. They were focused on their training, determined to prove that their success wasn't a fluke. But then, the unthinkable happened. One morning, as the cadets were preparing for their daily exercises, a group of alien instructors stormed into their quarters. Their leader, the same alien who had sabotaged their work, held up a small device, the stolen technology. "We found this in your possession," he said, his voice cold and accusing. "You're under arrest for theft and sabotage." The cadets were stunned. They had no idea how the device had ended up in their quarters, but they knew one thing for certain: they were being framed. "This is a setup," the leader said, his voice firm. "We didn't steal anything." But the aliens weren't listening. They had already made up their minds, and the cadets were taken into custody. As they were led away, the cadets exchanged worried glances. They knew they were in serious trouble, and they had no idea how to prove their innocence. The cadets were separated and interrogated, each one questioned about their involvement in the theft. The aliens were relentless, using every trick in the book to try and get the cadets to confess. But the cadets held firm, insisting that they were innocent. Meanwhile, the alien instructor who had framed them watched from the sidelines, a smug smile on his face. He had planned this carefully, and he was confident that the cadets would be expelled, or worse. As the hours passed, the cadets realized that they couldn't rely on the aliens to see the truth. If they wanted to clear their names, they would have to do it themselves. The leader managed to sneak a message to the others, using a code they had developed during their training. "We need to escape," he wrote. "Meet at the old storage facility at midnight." That night, the cadets made their move. Using their knowledge of the academy's layout and their skills in stealth, they managed to slip past their guards and meet at the designated location. The cadets knew they didn't have much time. The aliens would soon realize they were missing, and they would come after them with everything they had. But the cadets had a plan. "We need to find proof that we were framed," the strategist said, his voice low. "If we can show that the device was planted in our quarters, we can clear our names." The others nodded in agreement. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but they had no other choice. They had to act fast. The cadets split up, each one searching for clues that could prove their innocence. It was a risky move, but they knew they had to cover as much ground as possible. After hours of searching, the engineer found something, a security log that showed the alien instructor entering their quarters the night before the device was discovered. It was the proof they needed. "We've got him," she said, her voice filled with relief. "This shows that he planted the device. We can use this to clear our names." The cadets knew they had to act fast. They made their way to the academy's main hall, where the alien instructors were gathered. The alien who had framed them was there, his smug smile still in place. But the cadets weren't afraid. They had the proof they needed, and they were ready to fight for their freedom. "We didn't steal anything," the leader said, his voice firm. "And we can prove it." He held up the security log, and the room fell silent. The alien instructor's smile faded, replaced by a look of pure rage. He knew he had been caught. The cadets' proof was undeniable, and the alien instructors were forced to admit the truth. The cadets were cleared of all charges, and the alien who had framed them was arrested. But the cadets knew that their victory was just the beginning. They had proven their innocence, but they had also made powerful enemies. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and they would need to stay strong if they wanted to survive. The cadets stood in the Academy's main hall, surrounded by alien instructors and cadets from across the galaxy. The air was thick with tension, but the cadets held their heads high. They had faced impossible odds, proven their innocence, and exposed the corruption within the Academy. Now, it was time to bring their journey to a close. The alien instructor who had framed them was gone, arrested for his crimes. The cadets had proven that they were not thieves or saboteurs, they were innovators, problem solvers, and, most importantly, a force for good. The Academy's leaders had no choice but to acknowledge their achievements. One of the senior alien instructors stepped forward, his glowing eyes filled with a mix of respect and regret. "We owe you an apology," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "You have shown us that our prejudices blinded us to your potential. You have proven that greatness can come from the most unexpected places." The cadets exchanged relieved smiles. It was a moment of triumph, but it was also bittersweet. They had fought hard to earn this respect, and they knew that the road ahead would still be filled with challenges. A few weeks later, the cadets stood on a stage in the Academy's grand auditorium, dressed in their formal uniforms. The hall was filled with alien cadets and instructors, all there to witness the graduation ceremony. As their names were called, the cadets stepped forward to receive their diplomas. The audience erupted into applause, but the cadets knew that this moment wasn't just about them, it was about humanity. They had proven that humans were more than just survivors, they were leaders, innovators, and a force to be reckoned with. The leader was chosen to give the graduation speech. He stepped up to the podium, his heart pounding as he looked out at the crowd. "When we first arrived at this academy," he began, "we were seen as outsiders. We were called Deathworlders, and many of you doubted our abilities. But we didn't let that stop us. We worked hard, we stayed together, and we proved that anything is possible if you believe in yourself and your team." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Our journey wasn't easy. We faced challenges, setbacks, and even betrayal. But we never gave up. And in the end, we learned that true strength doesn't come from technology or power, it comes from unity, creativity, and the courage to keep going, no matter how hard things get." The audience was silent, hanging on his every word. We hope that our story will inspire you to look beyond your differences and see the potential in everyone. Because in the end, we're all part of the same galaxy. And if we work together, there's nothing we can't achieve. As the cadets left the stage, they reflected on everything they had been through. They had started as underdogs, but they had emerged as heroes. They had proven that humans were capable of greatness, and